Good morning, friends. Today I'm going to read you two stories about being in the ocean. The first one is about a little penguin who goes swimming to see how deep is the ocean, and the second one is about a seahorse and other animals in the ocean where the dad in the family takes care of the eggs in the ocean. So I hope you like both books. How Deep is the Sea by Anna Milbourne and Serena Rigoletti. How Deep is the Sea? How Deep is the Sea by Anna Milbourne, illustrated by Serena Rigoletti, designed by Laura Wood. Pipkin was a very small penguin who was always asking very big questions. How big was the dinosaur? Does chocolate grow on trees? What makes snow fall from the sky? Do you ask your mom and dad questions like that? I bet you do. But the thing he wanted to know most of all was, what do you think he's going to ask his mom? How deep is the sea? Penguins are really good swimmers, said his mama. Why don't you go and have a look? Pipkin took a very deep breath and dived into the sea. He swam down a little way into the sparkling blue and found a seal catching silver fish. Excuse me, said Pipkin, how deep is the sea? Deep enough to hold more fish than I could ever eat, said the seal. Would you like to stay for lunch? Sorry, I can't stop now, said Pipkin. I'm off to find the bottom of the sea. He swam down a little further into the deepening blue and found the biggest creature he'd ever seen, singing a rumbly song. What is it? Excuse me, said Pipkin. How deep is the sea? It's a blue whale, right? He says, deeper than a big blue whale like me has ever been, said the creature. Would you like to stay and sing to my blue whale friends across the sea? Sorry, I can't stop now, said Pipkin. I'm off to find the bottom of the sea. Pipkin swam down a little farther into a darkening blue and found a salty sea dog in a yellow submarine. Excuse me, said Pipkin, how deep is the sea? Deep enough to need a submarine to reach the very bottom, said the salty sea dog. I'm going there now. Would you like to join me? Yes, please, said Pipkin. The submarine took them down and down and down to where the sea turned night black. And there was no one else around. So friends, as you get deeper in the ocean, the sunlight doesn't go as far. So it actually does get darker as you go down. And different animals live where it's dark because different animals need different amounts of light. Then, one by one, twinkling lights began to appear. All kinds of wonderful lit up creatures were swimming around in the dark. Excuse me, said Pipkin, how deep is the sea? Deep enough to have whole mountains at the bottom of it, said one of the twinkly creatures. Look. And sure enough, just below was a range of towering mountains. Is this the very deepest part? Asked Pipkin. Not quite, said the twinkly creature, and it pointed to a valley. Down there is the deepest part of the sea. So the submarine took them down into the valley. It was very deep and very dark and very, very quiet. Floop, went the submarine as it landed on the bottom. I wonder whether anything lives all the way down here, whispered Pipkin. So they peered into the darkness, but nothing came to say hello. So they sat for a while at the bottom of the sea, with miles and miles of water above them. Ready to go home? Asked the salty sea dog. Yes, please, said Pipkin. The yellow submarine took them all the way back up to the top of the sea. Pipkin said to his mama, the sea is very, very deep. It is deep enough to hold more fish than a seal can ever eat, and deeper than a big blue whale has ever been. and deep enough to have whole mountains at the bottom, and lots of twinkly creatures hardly anyone has ever seen. And it's deep enough for very small penguins to have very big adventures, said his mama as she rubbed him dry. I'm proud of you, my little Pip. The end. Mr. Seahorse by Carle. Mr. Seahorse by Carle. Mr. and Mrs. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea. Mrs. Seahorse began to wiggle and twist this way and that. Can you wiggle and twist? It's time for me to lay my eggs, she said. Can I help? Asked Mr. Seahorse. Oh, yes, thank you, said Mrs. Seahorse, and she laid her eggs into a pouch on Mr. Seahorse's belly. I'll take good care of our eggs, I promise, said Mr. Seahorse. As Mrs. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, as Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a group of trumpet fish hidden in a patch of reeds. Isn't that cool? This one makes either the fish hidden or Mr. Seahorse hidden. There's the trumpet fish. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. How are you, Mr. Stickleback? Asked Mr. Seahorse. Delighted, replied Mr. Stickleback. I just built a nest, and right away Mrs. Stickleback laid her eggs into it. Now I am taking good care of them until they hatch. Keep up the good work, said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. So there's the nest of eggs, and the dad fish is guarding it. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by does anyone know what kind of fish that is? A lionfish hiding behind a coral reef. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. How are you, Mr. Tilapia? Asked Mr. Seahorse. Mr. Tilapia couldn't answer because his mouth was full of eggs. Oh, I know, said Mr. Seahorse. Mrs. Tilapia laid her eggs. Now you are taking good care of them until they hatch. Mr. Tilapia nodded his head. You must be very happy, said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. So friends, that's real. The tilapia fish really, the mommy lays the eggs and the dad fish holds them in his mouth and swims around with them till they hatch to keep them safe. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a pair of leaf fish hidden among the seaweed. Why do you think they're called leaf fish? Maybe they look like leaves. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. How are you, Mr. Curtis? Asked Mr. Seahorse. Perfectly fine, replied Mr. Curtis. Mrs. Curtis laid her eggs, and I have stuck them where? On my head. Now I am taking good care of them until they hatch. You are doing a good job, said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a stonefish hidden behind a rock. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. How are you, Mr. Pipe? Asked Mr. Seahorse. Couldn't be better, replied Mr. Pipe. Mrs. Pipe laid her eggs all along my belly. Do you see the eggs on his belly? Now I am taking good care of them until they hatch. You should feel proud of yourself, said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. How are you, Mr. Bullhead? Asked Mr. Seahorse. Tip-top, replied Mr. Bullhead. Mrs. Bullhead laid her eggs, and the eggs hatched. Now I'm babysitting. You're doing a fine job, said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. The time had come for the seahorse babies to be born. Mr. Seahorse wiggled and twisted this way and that. At last, the babies tumbled from Mr. Seahorse's pouch and swam away. One baby turned around and tried to come back into the pouch. "Oh no," said Mr. Seahorse, "I do love you, but now you are ready to be on your own." The end. On the back of this book, friends, we have a note from the author, Eric Carle. It says, "Dear friends, in most fish families, after the mother has laid the egg and the father has, the eggs are left on their own. But there are exceptions such as seahorse, stickleback, tilapia, curtis, nursery fish, pipefish, bullhead catfish, and some others." So he said sometimes the eggs just stay by themselves, but other fish take care of them, like the ones he put in his book. Not only are the eggs cared for by a parent, but surprise, that parent is the father. That may sound strange, but it is the truth. And this is my story about them. I hope you enjoy my story.
All right, guys, save all that information about being under the water in the ocean in your brain, because tomorrow we're going to write some stories about if you went scuba diving through the ocean.